Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
Louise Finlayson is part of Bethlehem Counseling Associates. She's having a class. If you're interested in life coaching, there's a little thing in the back if you want to go to that. So I guess you could say, it's safe to say she's in the positive thinking business. So it's going to be really interesting to hear what she has to say about this book. It's by Barbara Ehrenreich. It's called Bright Side It: How the Relentless Promotion of Positive Thinking Has Undermined America. So here's Louise to tell us about it.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Joe. Actually, I'm going to say that I'm not in the business of positive thinking as my primary business. I'm in the business of realistic thinking. So, and I think that Barbara Ehrenreich's book is really interesting in a lot of ways, and I think that she brings up some of the downsides of positive thinking, but I don't think it's positive thinking she's talking about most of the time. I think she's talking about magical thinking. And that was brought really into the limelight in American culture through the book The Secret. I don't know, how many of you have heard of The Secret? And The Secret has been really this big popular book saying, essentially, if you think about something, you can manifest it in your life. And so it's a way, in a nutshell, in my opinion, of engaging in magical thinking. Essentially, if I want a purse, and if I think about it, the purse will come into my life. So that, I think, is a little bit ludicrous. And otherwise, if that were true, then everyone would have a sunny wedding day, and everyone would have sunshine and lollipops all the time. Okay.
There you go.
So how many of you have read the book? Okay, so I'm going to be speaking to people who don't know much of anything about the book, and it's like all of Barbara Ehrenreich's books, I would guess. I haven't read them all, but she's a provocateur. And so one of the things she does really well is criticize. And she's done a really good job of criticizing, and sometimes I think to an extreme, and sometimes to a point of being really informational. So she starts out talking about her encounters with breast cancer and how positive thinking has infiltrated the breast cancer movement, and how she felt that there was absolutely no room for her to be angry, to have any negative thoughts about it, to feel sad about it, to feel devastated about it, anything like that. And so she goes into her scientific mode and starts doing research on does positive thinking affect the outcome of breast cancer. And so she looks at the way that it doesn't really scientifically affect the outcome of breast cancer, and there was a lot of research saying, well, yes, positive thoughts, like being in support groups and things like that, are really going to affect the long-term outcome in breast cancer survivors, and that's been debunked. So essentially, it doesn't really help in your survival rates. So she says, okay, then this is like a lot of hooey. And she also points to the fact that from her breast cancer, she ends up feeling that there's something really wrong with her for feeling angry. And she wants to be angry. She was very clear, like, this is my right to be angry. And I totally grant her her right to be angry. She can be as angry as she wants. So she then talks about how on these, there's like apparently multitudes of sites on the internet that have to do with breast cancer survivors who are communicating with each other. And so she floated out something out there that sort of talked about her anger and that, and she was responded to with a fair amount of negativity. Like, poor her, she'd better really get her attitude together, she's never going to make it. That essentially she thought there was virtually no empathy for her to be angry. And so she was more than happy to then go and look at all the ways that the breast cancer survivor movement is set up and designed to keep breast cancer survivors from being political and angry and activists in a way. So she talks about the history, then she goes into like taking it into the larger culture and talks about how the history of positive thinking goes way back into the 18th century, and she sees it as a response to Calvinism and the very sort of dire, just you work and you put your nose to the grindstone and all rewards will come in heaven, not on this earth, and that it was a very negative and very unfun kind of a religious ethic, and so that there was an upsurging of what was called New Thought, and that caught on in the 18th century or 19th century, and people took to it because it certainly was a brighter sort of way of thinking. And the problem with it is that it went again to a place of magical thinking often. She said that essentially these people who, I'm trying to find the place where God was no longer hostile or indifferent, she says. God was all-powerful, spirit and mind, and since man had mind, then essentially God and man were equal. And so she brings it into this place that now all of us are God, and now all of us have the ability to just manifest our reality, and that there's no such thing as illness. Illness is just a mistake in the universe. There's no such thing as sin. Sin is just like a mistake as well. So she talks about this, and this way that this then became a very positive force, a very strong force in American culture, and started to take over in a lot of different realms, including medicine. There was a doctor called Charles Beard who apparently there was a fair amount of people, women especially, who had this, what it was called I don't think I can say it, neurasthenia. And essentially, they would take to their bed and have all sorts of pain and stay bedridden for long periods of time. And so he used positive thought as a way to help them get better. Essentially saying, if you think you can get out of bed, you can get out of bed, and you're okay. And a lot of them rose from their beds and were okay. And so this was a way of dealing with it. From this whole movement, Christian Science was evolved. Norman Vincent Peale, I don't know how many of you have heard of him. He was a big advocate of all this positive thinking. And so she outlines how this all sort of has become mainstream now, and in fact it's a purely sort of American invention in a way. It's almost like a requirement as Americans to be positive. We're supposed to smile all the time. We're supposed to be the bright-sided people. I'm not sure I agree with her that we're always so bright-sided, but, she speaks to this as if it's a national disease. And so she starts looking at the effects of this in modern corporate culture, and looks at several aspects of the modern corporate culture and positive thinking. And one of the ways that she looks at it is from the point of view of how positive thinking has been used to control the workforce. And so one of the ways that positive thinking is used to control the workforce is all the people who work for, especially anyone who meets the public, is supposed to be positive. And so, like, say, stewardesses or flight attendants, as they're called today, or public, anybody who's involved with the public is supposed to be smiling and happy. And she cites the reports, all studies that talk about the stressors that come with false positivity. And that the people who are forced to be falsely positive and oh so bright essentially lose touch with their sense of their own emotions. She also talks about how positive thinking has been used in the downsizing of American cultures as a way to control the workforce. So there's two sides of it. One is the people who've been downsized are only complainers if they, if they're just considered whiners, because essentially, if they had a positive attitude, they'd be able to go out and manifest their own, wealth and whatever. So that they're not supposed to be complaining or whining. That this is an opportunity, and if they were really in the right mind frame, they would make this wonderful opportunity in their life and move forward in a new way in their life. So on one level, it's like saying to people who are downsized, be quiet. And on the other side, it's the people who are left to do the job of however many people who are downsized. It's a way of saying, okay, let's all be so bright and cheerful and do all this work. So positivity is a way of getting a lot more work out of a lot fewer people. And so there's a whole, essentially, what do I want to say, culture, a business that has derived from that, which has a lot of different names to it. Some of it can be executive coaching, it can be corporate coaching, it can be motivational speakers. There's a whole sort of genre of people out there who are charging huge amounts of money and going to speak. People like, say, Tony Robbins, Jack Welch, who used to be a CEO and now is a motivational speaker. Rudy Giuliani is now a motivational speaker. All these people charge these huge amounts of money to go to corporate America and teach about positive thinking and ways in which to use that. So she talks about this whole industry that has popped up. And in that, I thought one of the more amusing parts of the book was she goes to the National Speakers Association, which is a whole conglomerate of people who come, mostly wannabes, who are going to go and learn how to be motivational speakers. And so the people who allegedly are the successful motivational speakers are there, and she just, it's very amusing while she goes around and talks about the different messages that are pervaded during this National Speakers Association meeting. She talked about the amount of irrational exuberance going on in these meetings, where people are supposed to be intoning these certain vibrations, and everyone's so happy, and that there was no criticism allowed, there was no critical thought allowed. And this reminds me of times of certain kinds of aspects of, I am a trained life coach. And so one of the dark sides of coaching is this unrealistic and phony kind of brightness, which I saw in a lot of meetings. I think that coaching, like all industries or whatever, has its bright sides and its dark sides. And I think that's the dark side of some of the coaching, which is this connection to false positivity and like using that kind of thought in order to sell a product. And so she has a very fun time, I think. And I really had a blast listening to her debunk one by one some of the ideas that were being purported during these speaker association for motivational speakers, who are all going to go out, not all of them, but many of them were going to go to the corporate world and make megabucks trying to keep corporate America on track. So some of the ideas that go along with this are vision boards, which I think are a great idea. Vision boards are things in which you can create like a collage or something like that with ideas of what you want to invite into your life. Okay, so that's cool in my opinion. And then she goes on to say that then these are things that you're supposed to just look at and then they'll come to you. You know, you look at this vision board, and then the vision, whatever you put on this board is just going to happen. So, you know, I could put a house on the lake on that board, and I could put, you know, my own Learjet or something like that on the board, and I guess it would come to me. So that's where it all runs amok, and this is where apparently these motivational speakers were speaking of that these were going to really come to them if they just put these on the vision board. And so she's missing a big step in what, in my view, coaching really is, which is you may want to manifest a vision, but the only reason to do that is then to begin to take concrete steps to make that happen. Thought is not going to make it happen. And so thought is maybe necessary to decide what you want to bring into your life, but then all the rest of it has to come from having actually to do something about it. So she doesn't talk about that part of coaching at all, which is actually, in my view, what real coaching is. And unfortunately, there are a fair amount of these charlatans out there who are more than willing to sell snake oil. So she talks about how people talk in these National Speakers Association are talking about vibrational worlds and like how it's really important to have positive vibrations, and that thoughts are going to, if you have negative vibrations, you're going to attract negative energy. And so she goes through the scientific debunking of this idea of vibrations as a way of that somehow that there's any kind of scientific notion of this. She also talks about how people go into this idea of magnetism, that our thoughts are magnets, and if you think positively, then you will attract positive energy. And again, she debunks that scientifically. And then she looks at the idea of quantum physics, which is the latest rage in the positive thinking culture, which essentially says that anything we can imagine can happen. And so, she looks at. She gets a Nobel Prize physicist to, of course, debunk all this hooey. And ultimately, when she looks at all this, there's no balance. And I think that she's very great at what she does, which is being provocative, but there's not much of a balance, which is to say the other side of it. So she goes on to talk about the megachurches as the new religion of megachurches. And you probably have seen them on TV, the Robert Schulers, the Osteens, I think is their, yeah, and many, many more. And talks about how they've moved away from any religious message to positive thinking. Essentially, God wants us to have whatever we want. And that, say, Joel Osteen was in some kind of legal battle, and they won it, and it's like, God wanted it for me, So apparently that God is on the side of right, and whatever we manifest in our minds is going to happen. And from that, then these mega churches are obviously making huge amounts of money. And these are multi-million dollar organizations. The people who run them are more than happy to market anything that seems interesting. So people go and they get music, and they get lots of positive thought and lots of magical thinking, and then that's going to all be okay. So she goes on to then, which I think this is the most exaggerated part of her book, to blame the downfall of the American economy in the last 2 years on positive thinking. Not on greed, not on the lack of regulation, but on positive thinking. And so essentially she says that it's just because the CEOs all wanted to believe that growth could happen endlessly, and that, Alan Greenspan just believed everything, the bankers would say because he was so positive. And she goes on and blames positive thinking as a way of saying that this is what caused it, which I think is a little wrong-headed. That without a whole lot of greed and calculatingness, I don't think that this bubble would have burst as it did. And so I think she gets a little bit overboard with this whole notion of positive thought and exactly what it does. But I think that what is interesting or important about this book is the idea of groupthink, and how groupthink, and it doesn't matter what it is, and it can be positive thinking. I mean, it can be used to control people. And so if the idea is you're only supposed to be positive, then if you complain, you're bad or wrong, and you're going to be ejected from the group. And so I think that that's a really important thing, no matter what it is, whether it's from the Nazi point of view that, if you don't do this, then you're going to be ejected, or if you're, it really doesn't matter, religious sort of cult or whatever it is, that those are all methods of gaining power and control over people. So if positive thought is being used for that, then it's obviously a negative force. So what's the difference between positive thought, or what is the role of positive thought versus magical thinking? And I think that that's what she's using a lot of equal sign, positive thoughts equals magical thinking. And I don't think that that's a real fair use of the word. And I think that ultimately, if we look at any situation, let's take her breast cancer. So she says, I have a right to be angry. And I said, absolutely, she has a right to be angry. And she can be as angry as she wants. And is that going to help her breast cancer? No, she still has breast cancer. And is the anger going to make her breast cancer worse? No, we don't really have any evidence that it will make it worse. Will it make it better? Positive thinking, will that make it better? No, we don't really have any thoughts that it will make it better. So what is the role of positive thinking there? And in my view, it's accepting reality first, grappling with every emotions you have about reality, and then from there, making a choice whether you want to move forward in a positive way in your life or not. Now, people, in my view, because this is my business, I'm a psychotherapist and a coach, and I spend a whole lot of time with people who are in the habit of negative thinking. And from that negative thinking, they get depressed, and their lives sort of go into this sort of downward spiral. And so I don't say to them, okay, just like smile every day and everything will be fine. That's not the idea of positive thinking, in my view, is to accept reality. Okay, yeah, okay, yeah, you're unemployed, or yeah, you have breast cancer, or yeah, whatever it is, because all of us have lives, and all of us have stuff in our lives. Now, we can decide whether we're going to view that and be angry, which, well, who does anger hurt? Does it hurt the breast cancer? Does it make it go away? No. We can be angry at our bosses for firing us. Does that get us our job back? No. So ultimately, anger hurts us. And it doesn't necessarily contribute to disease. It doesn't necessarily make a disease happen, like, oh, I'm angry, therefore I got this disease. But it does affect our quality of life. And so from that point of view, I think that's where we have choices. We don't have choice to use positive thinking to affect magical changes. We have positive thinking to affect our quality of life, given whatever it is that's dealt to us. And so I think that she is, in her book, saying, well, being angry is the right way to respond to this, and I have my right to be angry. And I say, yeah, you have your right to be angry, but your quality of life is going to be impacted by being angry all the time. Now, working through the anger, absolutely. Is that a natural response to, say, disease? Yeah. Like any loss, we would get angry. We would go through stages of loss, just like if somebody dies or whatever it is. If an earthquake comes, we'll go through all sorts of stages of grieving. But then comes the accepting of reality. And then from the accepting of reality comes the what are we going to do with it? And from that is the place of making a choice whether you want to go into positive thought or negative thought. And so I think the place to look at in positive thinking is if positive thinking is used to control people, if somebody is going to benefit either through getting power, getting money, getting control of something, then I would be suspicious of it. When it's being enforced as like, we must be positive or else, if you complain, you are now going to be outcast. All of that, I would say, yeah, I would want to take a real good look at that and question somebody's motives. But her ultimate thesis, I think, is a little bit lopsided. And she spends one page on talking about the other side of it. And so there's absolutely no balance in the book, but it's very provocative and very fun in a lot of ways. Another part of the book that I thought was funny, just because it shows her humanity, is she had an interview with Martin Seligman, who is the psychologist in charge of positive psychology. And he, in her opinion, dissed her. And she was furious. And so in the book, she goes about trashing him and all of his science because she was personally angry at him. So it was, I think, an amusing sort of thing where she uses her very barbed tongue, or pen as it is in this case, to get back at anything that she has a personal vendetta against, and positive psychology was one of them, and saying it's pretty much a whole lot of hooey in her opinion. But I think that if any of us take a look at whether we'd rather walk around with a sour look in our face and being angry, or being able to look at what we do have and look at the wealth and the bounty of what we have, that might be a happier way to go through life. So it doesn't mean being brainwashed. It doesn't mean not being able to see the problems in life. And if that's what we're doing to the exclusion of, if we're just looking at the positive and we're rose-colored glasses and the Pollyanna point of view, then I think that we're probably a little bit off balance. But the same is said on the other side. Is if what we're seeing is the dark side, we're manifesting a lot of anger, a lot of resentment, then that's imbalanced too. So that's my analysis of Barbara's book. So, any questions?
You said there's an assumption somewhere along the line that this positive thinking is replacing analytical thinking.
Yeah.
So how do we reverse that trend to make more people read the Wall Street Journal's op-ed pages and do some analytical or critical thinking about what's in front of us today?
Yeah. Well, certainly not by the way that some of these motivational speakers and other gurus who are saying don't even watch the news. There's a whole trend of saying too much negative energy there. Don't expose yourself to anything negative. Get rid of negative people in your life. Get rid of negative messages. Don't watch the news. Don't watch anything real. Don't be involved in reality. So that's not the way, I don't think. But I do think that, how do we get people to do anything that goes beyond a soundbite? I think it's a cultural trend right now where our attention spans are shorter and shorter. We're willing to take what's delivered to us from little clips, either a soundbite or a headline. And that's our analytic thinking right now. And so that's a large question, and I don't know if I have the answer to it, but I think it's a cultural trend that's a little concerning, that people aren't really looking very deeply at anything, and they're willing to take whatever's handed to them. And a lot of what's handed to them is getting more and more condensed through fewer and fewer corporations who have some reason to hand us these kinds of messages. So the news and all that is getting more and more controlled by fewer and fewer people. So there's less and less diversity in the news, but I don't think people are that interested in. If you look at the news channels, they all almost say the same thing. It's like a very, very. There's not much variety to it.
Well, I think there is. So I think there's a wide variety of news out there. Either written or verbal way to do that. But,
yeah.
So we're unsure how we can transcend from what I like to call the microwave mentality, where when it now, when it's short, when it's sweet, without doing some kind of a critical thinker or analytical thinking about anything that's in front of us to do that.
Well, that would be. Part of it would be an educational process. Where I don't know how much schools are really challenging kids to be analytical thinkers. I think that it's.
Well, fortunately, my graduate education was the focus of analytical or critical thinking.
What was?
My graduate education strictly focused on that, all right? But I'm not saying we need 100,000 MBAs coming out of our schools every week, all right? That would be too much groupthink, no doubt about that. I guess the other issue I have with your content, how you displayed it, is this theory about vision and focus. Vision boards are used in my world to stay focused. If you have a focus, you want to sell this customer, you want to develop a product or refine the product, your focus is on refining this product and identifying the segment where you're going to sell it or how you're going to make use of it. So it's strictly to maintain a very tight focus, maybe a long-term tight focus to do that. That's the history behind some of the vision concept of vision boards. Is the storyboard to stay focused.
Some of them.
That's where I come from with all that.
I think that there can be very useful instruments. I think this is where I think she throws the baby out with the bathwater. She sees somebody use something in a way that is fantastical, right? Which is using a vision board to say, okay, if you look at it, it will come to you. And I think that that's where, there may be some people out there that use vision boards that way, but that's not the appropriate use of a vision board, in my opinion. And my guess is you don't just look at a vision board to hope that magically somehow customers are going to come to you, or that this product will, sell this way or that way. That's just not going to happen. So I think she takes a very fringy aspect of things and makes it seem like it's mainstream. Yeah, exactly.
Comparing that to some of the leadership literature today, like Warren Bennis is writing, and what are some of the qualities of the top leaders in our country, and how can we identify those features and let some of those people have a wider network to communicate their message and say, what is it? How do we develop great leaders in our country today? What else can we do? Not only in the corporate world, but in the public service, which is in desperate need of obviously.
Right.
An average leader, I think, would be just phenomenal if we could do that in our country.
Yeah.
We could find an average leader to go into public
Yeah.
service. We'd really be miles ahead, but
Yeah.
that's a different
Right.
issue.
Yeah.
So I know one of his messages has been, of all the leadership he looks at, is the teachable point of view. The top leader has a teachable point of view that he can bring to the organization, and let those people embrace that or argue either side of it, and go out and do their thing, and let more leaders
Yeah.
become developed with all that.
Yeah.
So the
And
question
she's
is, in your
talking-
profession, how do you do that in your profession?
How do I do?
How can we do that if we want to embrace that? How can we do that within your profession?
Which profession are you talking
Coaching.
about? Oh, coaching. Well, I think that it's ultimately seeing a way to really see what it is that the leader is up to. You know, what is this leader leading? What are they looking to do? And so in Barbara Ehrenreich's book, she's essentially saying that there's the whole sweat lodge mentality and, just this notion of let's get some crystals and different things and we'll get our corporations in line with some kind of magical thought. And it's really vacant of values and a vision. And so my thought is, unless you know what you're doing and why you're doing it, that's not going to be very helpful. And I think that's where a lot of corporate America has gone awry, and it's just this notion of keeping up with the competition, and there's sort of a crazed kind of a thing that is contagion at times where, okay, now we do this, and now we do, and there's trends that just keep sort of catching in a way. And I think it's hard to keep track of a value of commitment to one's employees, to one's customers, to whatever. And if within a coaching profession, if you're able to keep very clear with what is it are your values, what it is your product is, what is your message, all of those kinds of things, you're going to be a much better leader. You're going to be able to, and what is the corporate climate that you want to create? Are you creating a climate of backbiting and exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, all those values are just right now not particularly there. So she's talking about the dark side of positive thinking, which is don't shut up, don't complain, and be smiling. So yeah. Yes.
I'd like to comment on when I first came here, I thought you were going to surely be against Ehrenreich. And in favor of the positivism because of your background. But I'm very happy to see that you are a realist. I'm a secular humanist, and I'm very sympathetic to that. I'm also in a book club where we, for some reason, were trapped into reading a book by Valant. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's a disciple of Martin Seligman, who is his guru.
Right.
And he comes up with the theory that positive emotion is what he helped. The name of the book is Spiritual Evolution. So all of our evolution is tied to positive emotions. And all the negative emotions we don't pay any attention to. I mean, this is really a warped way of looking at life.
Right.
You certainly need anger, doubt, and other emotions that come into play in our life. So I'm very happy to hear what you've had to say, because it really coincides with the way we think.
Yeah, because I'm thinking, why would we have anger? Why would sadness, anger, worry, fear exist if there was something wrong with them? They're all there for purposes, evolutionarily.
They're part of our toolbox.
Yeah, absolutely. Whether we develop them as a way of life is the problem. That's where it's like anything is out of balance is a problem. And so if you're angry a lot of the time, if you're worried a lot of the time, if you're sad a lot of the time, it's out of balance. And that's where it becomes problematic, just the same as if you are only looking at positive things, or if you're like, exuberant all the time. There's something odd about that. What in humanity is that consistent? We're not anything that consistently. And so we know it's an act if somebody's just always like that. It's just not possible. It's not human. So we'll have moments of sadness, we'll have moments of happiness, we'll have all sorts of stuff, and it's all the deal.
Now, people like Norman Vincent Peale, Schuller, and Mary Baker Eddy, these are Americans, and I was wondering if there's anything there with part of this being part of, we never had a war in our lands, even though there's a lot of suffering, America's been rich. How would this go in other countries like India or China and so on? Are there movements of that kind? Did she mention anything about the American experience in this?
Well, she's saying it's a uniquely American phenomenon. Although I don't know exactly, because I think if you look at, say, different kinds of Buddhist thought, it's not exactly positive.
Well, actually, in Buddhist thought, you have the other thing. I mean, all life is suffering, and you want to get out of here so you don't suffer. But I mean, there's an emphasis on. No,
that's not my understanding of Buddhist thought. My understanding is that all attachment to material objects is suffering, and that our thoughts can either manifest suffering, like by attachment, or we can let go of our attachments and therefore be in enlightenment, which is a state of non-suffering. It doesn't mean, and non-suffering in my interpretation of Buddhist thought does not mean la 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 like that. This is not this false happiness that she's talking about, which is magical thinking, I think, and enforced cheerfulness. That's not what I think Buddhism is talking about. I think it's an equanimity within, which is to be able to deal with the ups and downs and the things that come in life, which come in all packages, right? I mean, from the birth of a baby to 9/11, right?
Yeah. The downside of that is that eventually you're not the best thing to be, at least from my understanding, but it's not to be in this world. And basically what happens as a result of this, you achieve nirvana, you're not in the cycle of birth and re-death. So that implies that this world is something you want to get out of, because basically the best thing, it's not like being born again in Christ, it's like never being born again is the best thing can happen to you. That's called nirvana. So implicit in that is being in this life cycle of this world is not that great, so I could say there's something negative in that.
Well, I don't really, I'm not a Buddhist scholar or a Hindu scholar or whatever, so I can't really speak to all that from that point of view, but I can speak from the point of view that the idea of non-attachment, I think, is where can help people be less attached to their thoughts, can be less attached to their feelings, and therefore begin to have an observer self. And from that observer self place, then we hopefully can see things through realistic eyes and not through idealistic eyes or through pessimistic eyes. Yes?
Could I just say that you're talking about at the beginning, you said that Barbara Ehrenreich was a breast cancer survivor. I'm a breast cancer survivor, and I did a lot of work for the American Cancer Society over many years. We used to have a little button that said, "Attitude is everything." Mm-hmm. And we wore that prominently on our jackets when we went to visit women who had recently been diagnosed with breast cancer. And from my own experience, just the personal, and from visiting these women, many, some very young, in their late 20s all the way up into their 80s, I found personally that the key thing that kept these women going back for their chemo treatments, getting up in the morning out of bed, was, I don't know whether Barbara Ehrenreich calls this positive thinking, but was a generally not sunny, I don't want to use that word, but a generally positive outlook on life. I don't want to get rid of the word positive.
Right.
But so what I thought at the time was, and I was that way too, I went to work, I raised my children, I had a husband, I ran a household, I went for chemo, and I did all this.
Yeah.
But that's my nature, and then I thought, who is to say that kind of positive, if you will, attitude did not do something, ignite something in my body to respond, that responds to the chemo. And maybe that's magical thinking.
Yeah.
Probably is.
Right.
But as long as I thought that way, I thought, yeah, I'm going to go and do this chemo. I'm going to get out of bed, and I'm going to go and do it, and I'm going to go to work, and I'm going to raise my children, I'm going to do all these things. And I'm going to, if I feel bad, I'm just going to suck it up, and, I may temporarily feel terrible, but I'm going to get over it, because I always have in the past.
Yeah.
And I know from experience that I can do that.
Absolutely.
So there are some elements of this that I think are
Absolutely. As long as you weren't
somewhat valid.
As long as you aren't saying, my positive thinking, if I think positively, I won't have breast cancer anymore.
No.
And if I think negatively, I will create more disease in me. And that's what she's saying the breast cancer movement has done to a large degree, and which has, so I think she's lopsided in that. I think in its darkest moments it may do that, but I don't think the whole culture is that way. I think exactly what you're saying. It helps you get through it to have positive thought and have a positive attitude. If you're thinking magically that you're going to not have breast cancer if you think positively, then I think, and especially if it's sort of like, okay, that I'm responsible for my breast cancer because I must have had a negative thought. And so that's what she's saying is being peddled out there to breast cancer survivors, and that she thinks that if you have a relapse and breast cancer comes back, that essentially women are saying, I must have been having negative thinking, and it must have been I wasn't positive enough. So that's where I think that's the dark side of this notion of positive thinking, if it's a blame the victim kind of a thing. So that's her take on it. Yes.
Many years ago, many more than I'd like to remember, I was a social worker during the Great Depression. I had just gotten out of college. I was very young, about 20 at the time. And I went into homes where the grief was overwhelming, and I even cried with some of my clients. But one day I went to see Mr. Riley. Mr. Riley had been thrown out of his home. He had been considered an outcast because of no work. And I said to him, Mr. Riley, why do you smile when I come to see you? And he said words that I have never forgotten, and I think have been very important to me. He said, I would prefer to smile my grief than to cry my grief. And it seems to me that that has embodied something that we have been talking about today. I don't know if you agree, but it came to me after all these years sitting here and always thinking of Mr. Riley. And I won't tell you how he died because I have to identify him. Because he was living alone, we were not able to give him the coal that he needed, just a small amount. I was called in by the police to identify him. He had frozen to death. And I went in as this young girl who knew very little about life except to do well and become a Phi Beta Kappa and think that was the beginning and end of living. And I looked at the face that was dead. I identified Mr. Riley, but he has never left me in all these years, so I'm sharing it with you.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Thanks, Louise, for coming.
You're welcome.